Hello everyone. I want to talk today about this argument.
Recent migrant populations might have more kids than the average in the country they've moved to, but that's a mix of being generally poorer than the native population, which resolves itself within a few generations.
Now, this argument is wrong on many levels, but I'm mainly homing in on the idea that fertility rates decrease simply because of prosperity, that they are somehow natural. This argument is pushed around a lot. It is considered true, so true that it is always said without qualification. It has become an entrenched part of the consensus. The problem with this argument is it simply isn't true, and to an extent this seems rather obvious. Between the 50s and the 60s, Britain saw a good increase in prosperity, and yet during this time fertility rates in Britain rose from 2.1 in 1954 to 2.9 in 1964. Even if you correct for ethnicity and births from foreign-born parents, the fertility rate amongst British mothers was still 2.6. It has of course decreased since then, quite drastically, but survey data still shows an interest amongst women to have more children than they currently have, with the ideal often seen as being between 2 and 3. It's much more plausible that British people are being held back financially from having children, not that they're simply too rich to be interested. The drop in fertility rates coincides with the stagnation of wages and, more importantly, an unprecedented increase in house prices, not, as some people argue, due to prosperity.
It's now down here again, in actual fact. And there's the same thing. And now in Euroland, they're basically, actually, that's euro. Here we're about 1.7. Euroland, you're basically almost close to negative. So what happened to the money inflation link? Well, you could say that people aren't spending as much, the multiplier for money has gone down, that the public sector filled in for the private sector. But when you look at the numbers, it's simply not true. I mean, what the central banks were doing with this stuff called quantitative easing, they were basically pushing up the prices of stocks, bonds, and houses in the hopes that somehow that would trickle down to everybody else. And in fact, what did that do? It just basically made people who have stocks, bonds, and houses even richer. Now, you can make an argument about rich people don't spend as much as poor people, so there's actually less cash in the economy. But nonetheless, you dumped 17 trillion and there's no inflation anywhere. Now, why does that matter? It matters because back in the 70s, how many of you were lucky enough to buy a house in the period between 1968 and 1974? Anybody? You played the biggest scam the world's ever seen, because you had a 30-year fix at 5% and inflation went to 10, and the bank ate the difference, which is why your kids will never have a house the same size as yours. That's the truth, right? A little inflation's a damn good thing if you have debt. And most of us are debtors. The problem in the 1970s was the creditor class, the investor class, were being beaten to death by inflation. It was turning into a debtor's paradise. Problem, what's this one done? A creditor's paradise. There's no way out of the debt. And why not? Next one. Because your wages aren't rising. And also because of those bailouts. You see, with those bailouts, let's have a look at the US. You're constantly told that there's no money for anything. It's austerity.
If you want to watch the whole Mark Blyth video, I've put the link in the description. Anyway, a study into the effects of house pricing on fertility rates found that a 10% increase in house prices leads to a 4.9% decrease in births amongst renters. This coincides with a 2.8% increase in fertility among existing homeowners. But here lies the problem. Homeowners are getting too old to have children anymore. In 2013, only 20% of people in their 20s were homeowners, compared with 50% just 20 years earlier. Home ownership in the UK is collapsing at an alarming rate. Compound the unfettered increase in house prices with a welfare system that shows little interest in promoting young families compared to systems devised elsewhere, and we can't expect to see any sort of change. So, what can be done about this? Immigration causes a huge upward pressure on house prices, over 20% by some estimates. So immigration needs to be addressed as part of any sensible solution. And to some extent, more houses need to be built. This has been a problem in the past because a big core of each party's base were homeowners. And despite this being a paper loss, no homeowner wants to see the price of their asset fall. But as home ownership has decreased, more and more politicians are willing to talk about this. Then there are the social and welfare policies. I don't think it's early enough to tell if the sort of policies being tried in places like Hungary are actually working yet, but they are already showing promising signs. Admittedly, I think even these Hungarian policies don't actually go far enough. Tax breaks work well for middle class families, which is something we've tried in the UK before, but these are the same families where both parents are pursuing careers. Meanwhile, working class parents see their tax burden through other means, such as council tax, so otherwise don't see the benefits. I would like to see children treated more as an investment by the state rather than a luxury as they are now, with a young family support payment, maybe in the form of bonds or just a young family rebate, divided between two parents to promote two-parent households without leaving a single parent out in the cold should the worst happen. Parents are raising future citizens, carers, and even taxpayers, and the state should really start treating parenting as such. If you have any ideas on the issue of how we can improve fertility rates, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.
And now, someone might say, well, Irish people aren't like today's immigrants. They were able to integrate. They integrated just fine. No troubles there. Hey, troubles. Do you get it?